Eleanor Jeans is the Associate Minister with the Mission Hub at St Paul's Leamington Spa and moved after 8 years as an Associate Vicar in Kettering. She's been a schools worker in inner city Manchester, and Eleanor loves to continue to support anyone looking to grow in that area of ministry, whether that be collective worship all the way through to helping new communities worship. Eleanor trained as a professional violinist, and as well as leading worship in churches, has a passion for music and in outreach, and has run a community gospel choir. Now, Eleanor supports single people in churches and finds ways to reach them with the good news of Jesus. Eleanor loves to get to know people and would be very happy to chat to anyone who wants to see what God is doing in their community. Eleanor, let me first double check something in my notes here. I want to check. Are you a single lady, as Beyonce sings?
I am, although I can't dance like Beyonce, let's put it like that now. I am very much single, yes.
Well, Eleanor and I are chatting today because this isn't a revenge podcast against married people. No, this is us here at UCB on the Life Issues podcast, asking the real questions, asking a direct question as Ray sings in her song, "Where is my husband? And am I defined by not having one?" Eleanor, how do you feel when someone says, "Are you married?"
It's a good question. I'm quite happy for people to ask me that question because, you know, it's we're finding out about each other, and as long as I can ask them that question back, and I feel okay being asked that question. It's interesting the response you get when you say no, more to the point. I think that's what's really interesting. So when someone says, "Are you married?" and I say no, sometimes people will say, "Oh, do you want to get married?" or "Have you been married?" or something like that. And I sometimes feel like I have to explain myself. When actually I shouldn't have to, should I? It should be fine for me to say, "No, I'm not married." Yet some people don't take it that way. They want to know more. They want to know why.
And there's at times an assumption, isn't there, when people start to gauge, "Oh, you're of my generation," or "You're surrounded by other married couples at that time or the event or whatever's going on." There's just at times an automatic assumption of, "Oh, Eleanor is married." And so there's a surprise element at times as well that certainly I've seen people almost kind of compensate for. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, there's definitely a sense that there is that assumption because we think of marriage as the norm. And I think particularly in churches, we can so often think of that marriage is what we should be aiming for. And you know, I remember growing up thinking that all the time. Oh, yes, I should do that. And then, you know, I've been involved in youth things when you've asked particularly the girls to write down what they aspire to. And so many of them have written being married and having children. And it's not wrong to aspire to that. But I think there is a sense that even in people assuming that you're married is sort of saying that's the norm that they expect, and helping people understand that actually there's more than one norm in this. Singleness isn't like the unusual way to live. There's many of us that are single.
There is at times that stigma, sometimes even shame or the pity that comes when the answer to the question is, "No, I'm not married." Women are made to feel at times like they don't have worth if they're not married and haven't got to down the aisle yet, or they're not settling down. There can almost become an idolatry in marriage, can't there, Eleanor?
Yeah, I think they can. And actually, it's interesting, isn't it, that we have that phrase, "haven't walked down the aisle yet." that we see that as what we should be aiming for, as if saying that That's what we worship. We worship the idea of marriage, because that's what idolatry is, isn't it? But actually, when we look in scripture, we see that our worth is it's not in our marital status. It's not in that. It's as children of God. And nowhere in the Bible does it say your worth is in your relationship status. It's actually your worth as a child of God, as someone who is fearfully and wonderfully made, as it says in Psalm 139, as a child of God, as it says in the New Testament, as being part of the body of Christ. That is where our worth is. It's seen through being in Jesus, and not in whether we've walked down the aisle or whether we've met someone who we can share our life with. And it's not an individualistic thing to say that, because Jesus and Paul, they were both single. They demonstrate that sort of importance of a single life, that it's good you can live a fulfilled life in that way. But yeah, so often we can be made to feel like our worth is in something other than our marital status. I use a quote on Securely Single. It's a course I've written that is something along the lines of, and I might be paraphrasing this, our worth is in our creational status, not our relational status. And I think that's really helpful, because it's actually, we are created by God. Yes, we're created by God to be in relationship. Genesis says it's not good for man or woman to be alone, but that doesn't have to be in a unit of a marriage. It can be in so many other ways as well.
How do you explain to your young people, or even friends who might be going through a season of singleness, that when there is such a pressure and a culture in society to be married, that actually it doesn't need to be priority, it doesn't need to go at the top of the list. They can focus on being them, who they are, themselves, and being that whole person that you've described, that is in God's word. How do you help to reorientate the priority or the focus back onto wholeheartedly what that God has made them a whole individual?
I love that, reorientate. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, because I obviously, one of my pet hates is when someone says to me, my other half, and I'm like, no, hang on a minute. You are a whole person. You're not a part of another. Yes, I suppose when you get married, there's that sense of two become one and all of that sort of stuff, but you're still a whole person. But in terms of helping people reorientate, I think there's a real danger when you're single to putting your life on hold, to almost saying, I am in a waiting room and I'm just going to twiddle my thumbs and read lifestyle magazines from 8 years ago, and not get on with anything else. And actually, there's a sense that we're called to abide in Christ. We're called to abide in him, not just sitting there doing nothing, but so we may bear fruit. And surely what God wants, if Jesus says, I've come to give life and life to the full, then that life to the full isn't seen in our marital status. It's seen as being in Christ. And therefore, I try and encourage people to think that, yes, it may be that you will meet someone. And so in some ways, you're in a waiting room, but don't just sit there thinking that that's it. Live your life, serve God, worship him, focus on him, because otherwise you're just wasting your life away. We can just put our lives on hold. As I said earlier, it's so easy to do that. I've done it, certainly, when I've almost not made decisions about things because I thought, well, if I do that, then I might not meet someone. Or if I go to that job, I might meet someone. And actually, I don't think that's a helpful way of doing anything. We need to try as much as we can to, as you say, reorientate ourselves around Jesus, and recognize that we can be content as we are, whatever length of time that is. And I think we all need to recognize that there will be some of us that won't get married, as well as those who will. But we need to make the most of the time we have. Otherwise, what's the point? It's just boring.
So is singleness, or a single season, a gift?
I personally feel that it is a gift. I think that For me, it's a gift because it enables being single, and I think I'll probably always be single, is a way that God has gifted me to be able to speak out for those who are single. But it gives me a different set of experiences that I can share with other people. I feel like I can be a bit of a role model for those who are single in my congregation and in other places. But I recognise that there are people who'll be like, oh, I don't want that gift. Can I give it back? Why? When can I return it? But Kate Wharton, who wrote a brilliant book called Single Minded, in her book, she talks about the actually, when we think about gifts, actually it's about grace. And of course, when we look at the Greek word charis, it's about gift, it's about grace. That's where we get charismatic from, and charismata, that sense of a gift of grace. And so sometimes we need to think of singleness and marriage as a grace that enables us to cope with those things and to live in that season that we are given. I think it can be a gift, but I acknowledge that for not for everyone it feels like that. But maybe we can start thinking of it like that, because if we start thinking of it like that, maybe it helps us reorientate ourselves and think about what singleness actually is and what it looks like. So my answer is yes and no, which I know is not a very good answer, but yeah, I would say it's both.
There can be an element of surprise sometimes when a spouse or partner ends the relationship abruptly. There's betrayal, there's divorce. And so suddenly we can find ourselves in a season of being single that we didn't expect to be. And I think as well as we get older, for both men and women, you've been building life together or doing life together, and all of a sudden things change. There can be hopes and dreams totally stolen and taken away. And there can be a sting of singleness when it's not expected. I wonder, Eleanor, with some of the resources that you've created within the Singleness series, would you be able to speak into that sense and that feeling of where did it all go wrong and what's wrong with me?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think anyone who is single, whether you've found yourself single again, particularly through divorce, I think it's very different for those who've been widowed. But for those who are divorced and those who've not married, is to ask that question, is something wrong with me? So if you're single and you've never married, you're asking that question because you think, well, why is that person got married and I haven't? What's wrong with me? What have I done wrong? Is it my hair? Is it my personality? But I think it's a different thing, isn't it? If you find yourself single again because you've divorced, you separated. I think there is a sense that there is still something about identity in all of that. That if we see our identity wrapped up so much in our marriage or in our relationships, then we lose something of the gift of God in being a child of God, and that our identity is so much more than being part of a couple. And I always try and encourage those who are married to be thinking, actually, it's really good to have friends who are single or other friends. Make sure that you're not just a insular unit, because if something happens, then you're on your own. I haven't been through divorce. I haven't been through that breakup of a relationship. And I can't imagine how that must feel for someone, particularly if it happens very suddenly, you're not expecting it. But I do know that there are all sorts of ways that can help. So there is a great course, which has gone out of my mind, the name of it, but it's about recovering from divorce and being reminded of how God sees you and all of those things. But yeah, for those who've found themselves in that position again, there is something really important about community, about having others around you. And I think that's the case for whoever you are, whether you're single again because you've been divorced or if you're widowed. Interestingly, I know a lot of people who, when they think about being single again from being widowed, actually calling themselves single is a very difficult thing to do. And a lot of them don't. And that's absolutely fine, because it's a very different thing from someone leaving you and ending a marriage. But I think community and meaningful community is a good way for us to look at how we recover from those times when life throws those challenges. And when we're in community with others, actually from the start, it makes a big difference. So I do talk about it a bit on Securely Single, but I think, we just always need to be thinking, who's around me? Who are the people that can speak into my life and care for me? And that's the beauty of being Christians, of course, beauty of being in church. I hope. Not always the case, but yes.
I'm in a season where a friend of mine has just got married, another friend has just got engaged. Whether you're single, divorced, or widowed, even those seasons of celebration can be painful because, again, either something has been taken away or has not arrived yet. And so you may sense that you're in a season of waiting for the next thing and waiting for perhaps even a promise that God has spoken that he will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. He will take you to Boaz's field. If we find ourselves in amongst all of the celebrations, wanting to stand alongside others and celebrate with them, and yet there is a pain in that because we're celebrating something that we don't have just yet, how can we protect our heart in that?
Oh, I mean, I've certainly been through that season of, at one point I remember just being invited to wedding after wedding after wedding. And it was really hard when I was particularly in a state and season of really wanting to meet someone and get married. And it's really hard because actually one of the ways we sort of almost feel like we should do that is to withdraw. But I don't think that's necessarily the most helpful thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying to someone, I'm really pleased for you, but please understand that this is hard for me. And maybe we need to be more honest about that. I don't think I ever did that. I'd just like to say, I'm not speaking from experience of doing that, but I wonder whether we need to do that a little bit more, actually be honest and willing to say, this is hard. And yet being able to celebrate somehow. Because obviously the Bible reminds us to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who are mourning. Yeah. And so it's right to rejoice with people, isn't it? But also we need to look at our own hearts and say, okay, so why am I reacting in this way? How might I need to just think through how I respond? Maybe I go to the wedding, but maybe I see if I can bring a friend with me, or all those sort of things. And it, of course it's true. There's always going to be things that we see in other people that we want and we don't have. I can think of friends who would love to have children and haven't been able to. And actually the pain of seeing other people sharing that they're expecting a baby is really hard and really painful. But somehow we can celebrate even when it's really, really hard. But we need to acknowledge the pain. It's not brushing it under the carpet. It's not just pushing it down and not seeing it. It may be in those seasons that, for example, for you, it might just be about, is there someone else that you can share that with? Or is that, even with the friends that are getting married or the person who's got engaged, being able to be honest and say, look, I'm finding this hard. However, I am so happy for you. Please bear with me as I work through this. I know that's not always possible, but maybe we just need to be more honest about it, and not letting that impact how we relate to other people. It's like not going along to a wedding and just having a scowl all the way through it. It's probably not the best way. I mean, as a vicar, I do weddings. And for a long time, I found that really difficult. But I found myself, and actually, to be honest, it was through praying with people. It was through God's Holy Spirit being at work in me that I was able to then celebrate with those getting married, because I could celebrate with them. So I always had to park the things I found difficult at that point. It wasn't that I was pushing them down. I said, okay, in this moment, I'm celebrating with them. I might find this hard, but I want to make sure I'm celebrating.
That's an amazing thing to think about, that extra level as a vicar, if you're having to literally marry two people, even in those seasons where it's maybe a couple who are getting married for the second time, or people who are getting married later in life. And there's that question of, oh, okay, God, do I not get the happy ever after? And yet, God does want happily ever after for all of us in every season. We think about Ruth in Boaz's field before she even met him. And she was just following what she knew was the right thing to do to support her only living family member left on her husband's side of the family. She decided she was going to entrepreneur it up. You know, she was going to next level it up. And of course, from that season, she met her second husband. So what can we do in those seasons of singleness to stay strong but be fruitful, Eleanor?
Well, the nice thing with that illustration of Ruth is that she didn't go sort of gleaning in the field so she could meet a man. that wasn't her purpose. Mm-mm. Her purpose was to do what she felt was the right thing to do. And so actually in those seasons when we're maybe longing to meet someone, to get married, whatever, but we know that we just need to somehow be fruitful. If we do everything because we might meet someone, it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be healthy. It's going to just pull us down and make it really difficult. But if we are able to say, Lord, I want to be fruitful for you. I feel called into this. Let me do that. I mean, it's interesting because I can think of times when people have said to me, oh, Eleanor, if you're just yourself, if you just get happy and content, that's when you'll meet someone. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. But it can. I'm not saying that's the right way, because then again, if you're going, right, I'm going to be happy and content, you're sort of doing it for the wrong reasons, because you're sort of saying, if I'm happy and content, then maybe I'll meet someone. And I wonder whether it's trying to readdress our purpose. And if our purpose is to meet someone, then let's think, okay, maybe that's the wrong way around. Maybe I need to see that my purpose is to serve God, to love his people, to share the good news with others. And then if I meet someone, brilliant, win-win. But if I don't, I'm still serving God's purpose. I'm still being fruitful. I know that can be really hard, because actually if we have this massive desire that is just all encompassing, it's really hard to lay that down. But maybe sometimes we need to find ways to do that. Even in those times when that is so difficult, because otherwise everything will be all about the thing we don't have. And I'm not sure that's helpful for anyone.
No.
Yeah.
One of the things I get frustrated with hearing is that for single people, when they find themselves single and still single, that they should focus on growing in God. And so my response to that would be, do married people not grow in God? Is that only for single people? I find that really unhelpful as like a Christian single to do, so that there's an answer there, because actually we all want to grow in God, no matter what age and stage of life we're in. People almost at times, I feel, look for a consolation prize for singles.
Yeah, and absolutely. So obviously, whoever we are, if we follow Jesus, then we should be growing in relationship with him and developing that. And in different seasons, that will look different for different people. So, yeah, I get very frustrated when people say to me, well, you're single, you've got more time to do this, to serve at church, to do this. I'm like, yeah, but I've got to do all the washing. I've got to look after I live in a vicarage. I've got a massive garden. I've got to do the housework. Everything lands on my shoulders. Obviously, if you're married, you've also got a spouse, you might have children, you've got jobs, all of those things. So we all have things that we have to do every day. And so actually, if you're single, it's no different from when you're married. It just means that you can use your time slightly differently. But I think one of the things we do need to do is to think of the positives. So, I think sometimes people who, this is a generalization, obviously, there are people who are married who think, yes, you're single and therefore life is rubbish and everything's horrible and it's all negative. But you know what? You could focus on God and you can do all of this. It's really good. But actually, when we're single, we do have more time to do other things, and we can focus on God more. But we can also celebrate the positive things about being single. So, like, I asked some friends who are married, what are the things they miss about being single? And a lot of them were like, having the whole bed to myself, being able to choose what channel I watch on TV, all of those things, and it's really important that we think about the positives of being single. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that I can choose what I watch on telly. I can choose what I eat. I mean, it's not always very good, but I can do that. But then I also have to remember that those who are married have positive and negative things for them as well. And we can so often look at the other and look through rose-tinted spectacles, can't we? But we need to be thinking about the positives as well. And I think that goes both ways. So, it's very easy to look at people who are married and go, they got it all sorted. But actually, if we spent a day in their house, we know that life was really difficult at times, and vice versa. We need to hear each other's side of that.
Oh, definitely. It can be particularly painful when it's you having to pay the bill as the single person, or if there's an opportunity to do a group activity, but you're the third wheel or the fifth wheel or whatever it is. That can be rather awkward too. And it's great to chat with you, Eleanor. I want to chat as well about your course, Securely Single. But before we get to that, I do want to find out about being content as we are, because we talk about the invitations that come through the post, and being content to outstretch our hand and shake someone's hand and say, no, I am single. And even when it comes to church services, there's not a lot of, shall we say, conversations around being single and whole. I want to ask you, why do you think that is?
Oh, I think there's all sorts of reasons. I think in the years that have gone through in churches, part of that is because a lot of churches are led by married people, and that's just the way it has been. That is changing. There are a lot more single people who are in ministry, and so it does change. I think it's also partly because if you're married, you are going to naturally use illustrations in your sermons that are about your husband or your wife or your children. That's changing. So, actually, people like Single Friendly Church and other organisations are trying to encourage us to think about what illustrations we use on a Sunday in our sermons or whenever it might be. I think churches naturally are about family, and I love that. Personally, I love the fact that we're a church of all ages, and I'm quite crazy when we do activities with the kids, but we need to recognise that that's hard for some people. And so I think a lot of the reasons are to do with what people's natural, what they experience and what their life is like. That's what they're going to put into stuff. But also, the way culture around us is that we're very family orientated. And so, we'll have family services, we call them all age, but same thing, it's just a different name. We naturally find it much easier to do things like reaching out to our local schools, which is obviously going to then have much more of a, married couple feel to it, because we're reaching out, although there's lots of single parents as well. And that's a whole other way we need to be thinking about how we support people. And the fact is that it's actually really much harder to reach those who are single if we're thinking even just in terms of outreach. So I looked at our church stats, and I was looking at the stats for the last census, and the number of people who live on their own in percentage-wise of those in the area who are married is much higher in the local community than it is in the church. Wow. And that'll be the same in lots of places. So if we look at how many people in our congregations are single, it'll be a lower percentage in many places in comparison to the average number of people in their community who are living on their own, who are single. And even that says something about what we're doing as churches. So a lot of that, I think, is down to things that we do up front and the way we do stuff. So we do need to be thinking as church leaders. I need to be thinking as a church leader, how do I make that not the case? How do we do that in terms of who's up front, who's leading small groups, who's preaching, what things are we doing that those who are single can get involved in, because I think part of it's to do with how we've done all of those sort of things. And it's not going to change overnight. It is changing, though, I think, slowly.
Is singleness part of God's plan, Eleanor?
I think singleness is part of my plan. Or rather his plan for me. Otherwise that'd be wrong, wouldn't it? I didn't think it was. But over the years and through various different things that have happened, I don't now feel like I've missed out that I haven't got married. Because I think there's lots of things that I've done that I wouldn't have been able to do had I been married. And there've been seasons when that's been really hard, and there's been seasons when that's really good. So I do think singleness is part of God's plan for me. And I think it can be part of other people's plans as well. But I think the thing about what is God's plan is going to be different for every single one of us. But the big thing is that whoever we are, God's plan for us is that we thrive, that we flourish, and that we hold on to the fact that this life is finite, but eternity is eternal. And whatever happens in this life is for a season. And what we've got to look forward to is that we are, the Bible reminds us that God's people are the bride of Christ. And that we are all looking forward to the day when we will be with the bridegroom. And that is where the image of marriage helps us to think through what life will look like and what eternity will look like. And so God's plan for us is that we will be with him. And actually, when we think that God's plan is just in this lifetime, maybe we miss out on seeing the eternal perspective. It's not that God doesn't have plans for us now, and it's not that God doesn't want what's best for us. But here, that it's what he wants. He wants what's best for us. And I remember being in a conference once when we were worshipping, and it was when I was struggling particularly about being single, and I really felt God say, as we were singing a song, "I've protected you." And I knew straight away that was God saying to me, "I protected you from getting into the wrong relationship and marrying someone that it wouldn't have been good." Now, that's my experience. That's how I felt at that time. And I do thoroughly believe that. I think I wanted to get married, but I think I probably would have got married for the wrong reasons, because I wanted to, not because it was what God wanted for me. And so, for me, it's been part of God's plan. For others, it may not be, but somehow we have to trust God in that. And that's really hard to know what that looks like for us. But maybe a challenge for us all is to just not just live for the eternal perspective, but just keep that in our minds, look up and see Jesus and see his eternal plan, because that's the best one, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's the plan that we want.
Yeah.
I always think of the memes or the social media posts where Jesus has a bouquet of flowers behind his back, and we are standing there holding a single stem, and Jesus is saying, "Will you give me that? I have something much better." But you can't see it yet because it's behind Jesus's back. So, I love that. And that can be for many, many areas of our lives, but perhaps even for our single seasons too. I would love to come on to talk about, Eleanor, your course, Securely Single. Tell us a little bit about that and why you felt it important to create the course.
So I wrote it. Well, I read the outlines of it when I was finishing my theology degree, and I needed 15 credits. And I was like, what shall I do? And I thought, do you know what? There isn't a course on singleness, so I'm just going to write the outlines. And then a few years later, once I was in Kettering as an associate vicar, I had a number of conversations with different people about being single. And some of them were divorced, some of them had been widowed, some of them had always been single. And I just felt God say to me, you need to do something about this. You wrote the outlines of a course. So I then decided to put the course on in my church, and I had about 19 or 20 people on it. And I literally went from week to week writing it and then doing it that week. So I'd written the outlines. That's literally all I'd done. And so I went from week to week and did it like that. And I mean, it seemed to be received well. And then a friend of mine saw my advert for it and said, Eleanor, you should think about getting this published. So I sent it to him. He read it and said, yes, yeah, I think you should. And I just couldn't find anywhere to publish it, because very few places are going to publish a course when they don't know the person and all of that. So during lockdown in 2020, 2021, I had a sabbatical, and I spent 3 months building the website and filming the original course in my conservatory on an iPad, and then released it. So I basically published it and did it all myself, supported by Single Friendly Church. And then when I moved to where I am now in Leamington, I was very generously supported to film it more professionally. We've got a film producer in the congregation, so we filmed it more professionally, and so it looks a lot better now than it did when I did it. And yeah, so now it's out. It's sold on my website, and it's basically 5 weeks of material. I've done it live in my context. I've done it on Zoom across the country as well, and 5 weeks looking at various different aspects of singleness. Things like, is there something wrong with me? Talking about identity, talking about celibacy, talking about whether singleness is a gift, and that whole thing about being in a waiting room and actually making the most of our lives. And every week I get people to think about various different Bible passages and do a bit of study. So it's I really wrote it because there was nothing out there like it. I thought, do you know what? When I was in my 20s and I was really struggling with singleness, particularly then, I wished there'd been something I could have gone to. And so I did something. I wrote something that now people can do that. And we run it alternately with a marriage course. And I know there are other churches that are doing the same thing. So that what we're doing is we're saying, yes, marriage is one way, but singleness is another. Let's work on both of these so that we're not prioritizing one over the other. So, yeah. And if you want to find out more, you can look on my website.
Love it. If we are finding ourselves single and we've done the course and we know God's word and we want to remain pure and guilt-free, sin-free, but yet our love language is physical touch, and it's physically killing us for the lack of a cuddle, someone holding our hand, or even something more. How do we find completion in ourselves as single and yet not able to do anything about some of our natural impulses just as human beings, the way God's designed us to be, the dreams that we can even have? We're not even conscious, we're asleep, and sometimes our mind goes to places and you wake up and you think, did I just dream that? Was God there? Like, is this okay? And what does all that mean? What about that tension of needing and craving physical touch and physical attention, Eleanor?
Oh, that is so hard. I'm not sure I've got any really good answers to that. I guess the more I've been content as being single, the less that's been an issue. And I'm not sure that's a helpful answer for some people, but for me, that has been, really, really important. I think there's nothing wrong with asking friends for hugs and saying, look, can I just have a cuddle with you? It's not the same. I recognise that. It's not the same. But why shouldn't we do that, with our friends? I mean, I don't know whether you found in lockdown, I didn't realise how much I missed hugs until I had 4 months where I couldn't touch another human being. Yeah. I think, actually when those of us who are single, we're not the only ones who find that, because there'll be people in marriages who still find that they don't have the intimacy in marriage that they would want. There are those who are much older who live on their own and have no touch at all with another human being and all relationship, contact, conversation, whatever it might be. I'm not sure there's an easy answer, but friendship is really important. And I think growing good friendships makes a massive difference. It's very different from, say, a sexual relationship or having that physical touch that we might want that isn't appropriate with a friend. But it can be really fulfilling having those good friendships. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in the church, actually, about what friendship looks like. So there's a really good book called The Intimacy Deficit, which I've just read by Ed Shaw. It came out a few months ago. And what that's really good at is he talks a lot about thinking about how we can have intimacy with ourselves, how we can have intimacy with our friends, with God, and even with creation. And he gives some really good advice. And he very much talks about intimacy not being about physical touch, but about how we can gain that intimacy in other ways that helps us feel fulfilled and whole. But yeah, I don't have lots of really good answers for those who are really struggling with that close touch and physical relationships other than sort of throwing your arms around your best friend or whatever it might be. So I'm not sure I can answer that completely, but I hope that helps.
You talk about the importance of community and having good friendships run about. Do your friends relate to you differently? Not that you expect any special treatment, but do they, excuse the phrase, terrible phrase, word, accommodate for Eleanor being single? So do they, when there's an invitation to dinner, is there a couple of other single people at the table? Or is there those people where you have cultivated those relationships where you can go and say, I need a hug, I need a moment where it's just us and not you plus hubby or you plus whoever it is. Do you have those connection points?
Yes, I do. And I think that's grown over time. And I think it's always the case. So I'm at an age now where my friends who've got married have older children, and it's much easier to spend time with them when their children are able to be left. So, my married best friend came and stayed with me last weekend, and we were able to have just time with just the two of us, and that was really, really special. I have a best friend who's single, and we spend time together on holiday a lot. But I also have married friends and families that I just go and spend time with. And for me, I don't feel I need to be having dinner with them and other single people. I'm really content to just have time with them and be part of their family. And I always say to people, if you're married and you've got a single friend, don't feel, like Sunday lunch or something, or there's someone single in your church, invite them around for Sunday lunch. They don't have to stay the whole afternoon. They might not want to anyway. They can come around for food. It doesn't have to be like silver service. You don't have to drink champagne. You don't have to sit around and make small talk for 3 hours after lunch or something like that. Actually, there's just something about being part of family sometimes. So I've got that. And I'm very fortunate that my colleague where I work and his wife, I have an open invitation to Sunday lunch. So any Sunday I can go for lunch. But they also know that sometimes I want my space. Sometimes I might go elsewhere. I think if there are friends that sort of don't quite know what to do with you, I'm not sure whether they're good friends, really, or they need challenging. So I've got some wonderful friends, and I'm so grateful for all of them. During lockdown, every Saturday night, I spent time with my friends and their children. One of them's my godson. And we just spent every Saturday night on Zoom together, playing games. And it was lovely, and it was really intimate, and I got to know my godson a lot better, and I was part of their family. And but for other people it'll be different. It might just be, actually, if you're inviting someone around and you're married, think, there are other people I could invite, but just make sure you're not doing it so it looks like you're trying to matchmake them. That's probably something really important. That's the worst.
That's a whole other episode for our singleness series, because
and of what
there's that whole set-up culture in church. But actually, I want to chat to you about something, because we have spoken about this on UCB1 before. And fellow presenter Helen had a lovely guest, Lauren Window, who wrote Notes on Love. Well, in preparing for this conversation today and just mulling over all of the singleness culture that we have right now in church, she said something that made me go, oh, I don't get that at all. She chatted about us thinking about 10 people that we have round about us that actually could be the one but maybe we've put up barriers of they're too tall, they're too short, don't like their hair colour, don't like the car they drive, don't appreciate the job they do. And I'm not suggesting that our wonderful audience are that shallow, but those were Laura's comments in that particular episode for our Life Issues podcast. My first thought was, I don't even know 10 people in my community who could be the one. My community is married, dating, engaged, and most certainly too old, to the point where my church community would go, Ashley, we need to have a word with you. We're a little concerned. What are you chasing? You know, for what, you know, there's just, I don't have the 10 people in my community for a start. So I found that a little bit challenging, but there is a sense in it, isn't there? If okay, maybe we don't all live in London, you know, maybe we have rural communities and there is actually only just 2 people, or maybe even just 1 in the church, and he's the guy and you're the girl and the whole room is waiting for the happily ever after, and there's the awkward, you know, moment there. I think I would love to get your thought on that, Eleanor, of the, there are people around. They could be the one if we simply pushed aside our differences.
Well, that's a real challenge, isn't it? Because actually, it so depends on what the differences are. You know, so if it's because you don't like their car, I question quite a lot about that, because actually they could get another car or you could get over it. But like, yeah, I think it we can't manufacture it, can we? We can't manufacture a relationship. There has to be something that spark, or whatever you want to call it. There has to be something that means that you could even consider a relationship with someone. And I wonder whether sometimes we're too quick to think, oh, could this be a relationship? And maybe actually friendship is where it needs to start. And surely when we get to know people as friends and we grow a relationship with them in that way, then actually maybe sometimes that enables us to see people differently. And those things won't be important anymore. I mean, as you say, there are people who live in communities where there is, you know, no other single people, or there's one other single person and they're 3 times your age or whatever. In that case, yeah, that's not going to be the case for you there. There is online dating, and that is one way you can do it. But I don't know about you, but I've tried it and I found myself being really, really judgmental there as well. So, you know, like I wouldn't even wave to someone if their grammar was really bad. I'm like, oh no, what am I doing? But
you would hate my grammar, Eleanor. You would hate it.
Honestly, I don't do it anymore because I'm just so embarrassed about how judgmental I found myself to be. All sorts of reasons, whether it's because of their job or, oh no, they don't have a degree. You know, things like that. That shouldn't be what it's about. And in some ways, it's easier to be judgmental online because, you know, it's they're removed from you. But when it's people in your sort of area and in your sort of orbit, I guess, then if there's a chance that there's a relationship in one of them, maybe it's about getting to know them and being friends with them, and but trying not to see them as relationship potential. Because I think actually what we were saying about Ruth earlier, wasn't it, that she didn't go out into the field and go, oh yeah, I'm doing this so that I can meet someone. She was doing it because it was the right thing to do. And actually, I can think of all my friends who are married. I think the best relationships I've seen are the ones that have come out from friendship and have grown over time. And I think that's something that we miss out on sometimes. Again, I'm talking about friendship. It's an important thing.
I want to ask you something completely random. Do you curate your social media and who comes in and who comes out and what you watch and what you see?
Do I curate it, did you say? Yeah. I don't really know. I just basically go on Facebook and see what's there. I mean, I don't think about it too much, if I'm honest. I tend to use Facebook particularly for keeping in contact with friends. I don't use it to meet people. And I know other people do it in that way. I'm probably similar with Instagram. I'm not very good at using Instagram. Yeah, so I know there are people who will use that in all sorts of ways, but I'd rather have real relationships and spend time with people than think about how I use social media in that way. I share stupid things on social media. Usually it's something stupid I've done or something stupid my cat's done. So, yeah. But no, it's interesting, isn't it? How even that can be a way of meeting people and all of that stuff. But yeah, I don't tend to do that.
Yeah, the whole slide into my DMs situation is a this generation thing and can be rather awkward, especially if you somehow receive unwanted attention.
I mean, I have received unwanted attention through that. I've had all sorts of messages and I'm like, yeah, that's being deleted. I don't, yeah.
It's just another way to have an awkward moment if we don't have those barriers in check.
Yeah.
I have one final thing to ask you about, Eleanor, in the comparison. Not that we should compare, although we can find ourselves in that place, but I actually want to chat about the comparison of Bible characters, Bible stories. We chatted earlier about Ruth, but as I was reflecting before we had this conversation today, I thought about the life and marriage of Esther, who received attention from her husband really only, although there was a couple of exceptions, but really at her husband's request. And Esther walked into a marriage where actually at times it would probably feel like a single season for both her and her husband, almost living separate lives. And Esther had to come under that authority. He was the king. And for different people, there's different challenges, but actually at times, even for married couples, for whatever reason, passage of time, a difficult and challenging season, COVID even perhaps, you mentioned earlier on, some married couples slip back into operating and behaving like they're still single. And I'm being sensitive to this because perhaps there are listeners who actually that describes perfectly their relationship that they're in right now. And it's become, just simply living together. How can people who have found themselves single in a marriage remain faithful and strong in who they are as individuals, but also still give the person they're married to their whole heart, as the Bible asks us to do?
That's really hard. And I think, if there's anyone listening for whom you're in a relationship, you're in a marriage that it feels like that, we can often say, can't we, that you can feel lonely in a marriage, and you can act as live as if you are a single person. I'd really encourage you to find someone to talk to about that. Don't just leave it as it is. It might be talking to your church leader. It might be going for prayer ministry. It might be going for counselling, because that's not how marriage, I believe, should look. And if that's happened, then it's good to be looking into why and spending some time thinking through and praying through what that is. Because you would hope that if that was the situation that someone was in, that both parties would feel that. And therefore communication, it feels like to me that in that sort of situation, communication is maybe broken down a bit, and somehow something needs to be done. But I think really it's about acknowledging that and talking to others, and getting some support, because it does happen, and I can think of places where that has happened. And how do you keep going in a relationship when you've fallen apart from one another and there's lack of connection? And I'm not a marriage counsellor. I'm not someone who can talk into that very much, but maybe that's what is needed in some cases. Get some support, get some counselling. Don't just continue in the way that it is. I think it's I can't imagine what that place must feel like. And I can think of people that I've known and do know for whom that is the case. And in, I think, probably all of those cases, there's different ways to go. There's one way you go, okay, let's end it. But as you say, we want to do our best to keep our marriages going and to grow in that. There's other ways of saying, okay, something needs to change. What does that look like? Some people just keep going with the flow as it is. But I think there's more to it than that. I think there's more that can be done. And I'd really encourage anyone for whom that is the case to get some support and be prayed with, because I would imagine that it must have been very difficult for Esther, but there's a sense for Esther that there was a reason in that situation, wasn't there, that God was calling her into that. And it might be that is the case with someone else, but Esther knew that.
Yes,
she knew, and obviously there's this for such a time as this and all of that. So I think let's be aware that, we can't just look at one particular character and go, well, that's me then. Let's be thinking, okay, what's going on here? And pastorally, I would want to encourage people to be thinking, okay, I need to think through what is happening here. Let's not keep the status quo. Let's be working through this.
Eleanor, it's been amazing to chat to you. We mentioned earlier on the course, Securely Single, and people can check it out on the website, securelysingle.co.uk. Thinking for just a moment, we've touched on the Psalm 139, reminding ourselves that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. As a single person, and for all our single friends listening, is there a couple other scriptures that you hold on to, pray aloud, say aloud, you have as a fridge magnet or a coaster? What do you hold on to as a single person and quote over yourself over and over again?
Well, obviously that's Psalm 139, but another one that I have, someone did a little painting of it for me, is the passage in Philippians 4 where it says, I've learnt the secret of being content in any and every situation. And then it continues, doesn't it? And he says, and God can do all things. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And that sense that actually I can learn that art of being content. But I need to remember that it's through Jesus who strengthens me, through his Holy Spirit at work in me, that is possible. The other one is in some ways isn't necessarily to do with anything about being single, but that phrase in Psalm 34, I think it's verse 4 or 5, when it says, those who look to him are radiant. And that sense that actually, if I keep looking at Jesus, then I will shine his light. And that's something that I've got that on a picture that I see as I leave the house. And it just reminds me of the focus and the final one, which I wouldn't quote over myself, but I love Isaiah 54 and 55 and 56. And there's bits in those that remind us that because of Jesus, we have an inheritance that will never spoil, it won't perish, it won't fade. And particularly those passages, because it talks about the promise to the barren woman, so to the woman who doesn't have children, the promise to the divorced woman actually in there, but also later on the promise of the eunuch, and that sense of whoever we are, when we're single, we have such promise in Jesus. And I love to think that the Ethiopian eunuch, after he read Isaiah 53, went on to read those other chapters and saw that promise to the eunuch in there. So, and that will have really spoken to him. So, yeah, hold on to that reminder that we have an inheritance that will never perish, spoil or fade as well.
Eleanor, it's been amazing to chat to you today for our Life Issues podcast. You've helped us to remember that we can renew our minds each day and in every season, whether we're celebrating or whether we do find it a bit of a challenge. We can receive God's peace. It's okay to lament. It's okay to celebrate. It's also okay to be thankful in every season. Eleanor Jeans, bless you, and thank you for being my guest for our Life Issues podcast.
My pleasure, Ashley. It's been lovely to chat to you as well.